you, our members and guests in Seattle and Northern California, for joining us today. We're very excited to have three experts with us today to share their insights on this important and timely topic. Badri Narayanan Gopalakrishnan is a fellow at the Government of India's Niti Aayog, National Institution for Transforming India, where he also previously served as lead advisor and head for trade and commerce, strategic economic dialogue, international cooperation, and Vision India at 2047. Trisha Ray is associate director and resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center. Her research interests lie in geopolitical and security trends in relation to emerging technologies. Harshu Asnani is president of the technology and media business at Tech Mahindra, where he's responsible for growth in high-tech sector and the U.S. West Coast. So you can find more about their impressive bios on our website. For today's agenda, each of our three speakers will provide comments and perspectives on opportunities and challenges on India's journey to become a global power. We'll then start a moderate discussion led by Harshu, followed by audience Q&A. If you have questions for our speakers, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Please note that the discussion is on the record and being recorded and will be posted on our website, YouTube channel, and other social media platforms. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to Harshu.
Thank you so much for setting the context and having me. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Man, you can hear me well, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. No, so thanks for setting the context and having me. It's a pleasure to be moderating what I believe a very important conversation on India and the growing prowess on the world stage with its emergence as one of the fastest growing economies, its bold vision for 2047, which is 25 years from now, which would mark 100-year anniversary of India's independence. And this period is what government calls as the Amrit Kal, or the golden period for India, and the very ambitious agenda to transition India into a developed nation and becoming one of the two largest economies in the world. And I think how India maneuvers through its geopolitical policies in an increasingly fractured world, and also importantly, how it takes its 1.7 billion people, which is what its population is likely to be in 2047, forward with a common vision is how will determine its success. And to discuss the progress of India, I could not have asked for better panelists than Trisha and Badri. And with that, let me turn to Badri first to provide his comments on key takeaways from G20 and how they are related to India's ambitious goals to becoming a developed country in 2047 and its rise as a global power. So Badri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Harshul, and thank you, Man and Asia Society for organizing this wonderful event, the first India event in the Seattle chapter. So delighted to be part of this. First of all, when we think about this current, the current G20 under the leadership of India, it started with the spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, as we say in India, which is basically, when loosely translated, it's basically means the world is one family. So quite fitting to that kind of a broad spirit, we were able to come up with a consensus and a statement that was very inclusive, including all the G20 countries. So that was one major highlight, because until the last minute we were not sure that would happen. So that in itself was a great accomplishment. Apart from that, there have been many firsts in this. I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. One is that India, under India's leadership, we started for the first time, we included the Startup 2020. So we have like we have this G20 groups for think tanks, T20, civil society, C20, and so on, business B20. So the same way we also got this startup 20, S20, where the startups across the world, the G20 countries can get together and have a discussion. Another unique thing that happened in this G20 is setting up of an expert group, the G20 expert group on strengthening multilateral development banks. Again, this is a great move, important move, because there has been a global debate about the functioning of the multilateral development banks. Are they serving the purposes they were meant to perform in the beginning? And with the changing world, what should their priorities be? What should be the focus on sustainable development rather than just general economic growth? So these kind of things have been discussed, and this is the first time there is a global effort in G20 to form a very detailed institutional setup to discuss the reforms needed for strengthening these multilateral development banks like World Bank and so on. So these are some major first time stuff. But then apart from that, there also has been a lot of progress in the areas of renewable energy, discussions about hydrogen, green hydrogen, and so on, in terms of healthcare, in terms of digital sector, taking cue from Digital India, the India Stack, and so on, which we'll discuss later about. Then about sustainability with India's initiative of Mission Lifestyle for Environment, where we have to look at sustainability not only from a production perspective but also from a consumption, civic society perspective, from a common people perspective, and generally about sustainable development goals, a lot of multilateral reforms, trade and investment. So we had this Jaipur call for action for trade and investment, particularly focusing on micro, small, and medium enterprises and their integration with the global value chains, how they must be exposed to information in this era of digital technologies and information. How information is crucial for that. There was actually a progress made towards making very detailed trade intelligence and other information for the MSMEs through the International Trade Center, where India as a G20 president was involved, and also many other aspects there about the importance of making digital technologies available for the MSMEs from the perspective of trade. Then there were also a lot of discussion about agriculture, startups, as I already mentioned, cultural aspects, education, and one topic we'll be discussing later about employment and skilling, financial inclusion, and then tourism, and a lot of discussion about gender equity, women-led development, and about corruption, anti-corruption. So these are some of the broad areas. So India itself has a roadmap for greener India, what we call as Panchamrit. We are looking for reaching non-fossil fuel energy capacity of 500 gigawatts by 2030, and 50% of all energy requirements via renewable energy by 2030 again, reduce 1 billion carbon emissions by 2030, reduce carbon intensity below 45% by 2030, and one of the biggest target is net zero by 2070. So these are some targets that India has, which was also put forward in the G20 meetings. So I'll just take a pause here and maybe let Disha talk about some of the aspects. And I'm
I think, it clearly looks like India has been able to achieve a lot through its presidency in terms of bringing the countries together on a common platform and bringing that collective support and a collective vision for where it goes. It's set the bar really high. And thanks for the comments, Badri. Trisha, you want to add?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to perhaps take a step back and give some context. So the main topic I'll be touching upon, given my background in emerging tech and digital issues, is the major agenda point in India's presidency of the G20, which was digital public infrastructure, which is a term that's relatively new in the G20 discourse. So I wanted to talk about what India achieved domestically and then why it's become now a part of its global digital agenda. Now, India's digital economy has really exploded in the last decade, really. In 2014, only about 13% of the population had access to the internet. And by 2022, the number of India's internet users was 670 million, which is double the US population. But that was still at a little under 50%. So that's still an online population that has a lot of scope to grow. Another part of the factors behind this success has been what Badri has already mentioned, which is India Stack. Now, India Stack is a suite of APIs which were developed by private sector volunteers for use for a range of government services. This includes universal ID, Aadhaar, it includes digital payments, it includes digitization of documents, as well as authentication systems, which is called the consent layer. So all of this and the success that India has seen in deploying these systems across its population and improving access to a lot of government services is why India then has brought that into its G20 agenda as well in the form of the digital public infrastructure debate. I'll briefly talk about the T20 communique because I was part of the secretariat at my previous job that was putting that process together. Now, there was a big debate within the think tank 20 about the definition of digital public infrastructure, whether that should be something that is publicly made and owned, as in the government makes and owns this infrastructure, or public should be defined purely in terms of public good. So it doesn't matter if it's the private sector or the public sector building this infrastructure. And you can see some of that debate in the final Think 20 communique, as well as in the communique of, or the outcome document of the Digital Economy Working Group as well, where they finally set on defining DPI as a set of shared digital systems that should be secure and interoperable, built on open standards, or can be built on open standards, and provide equitable access to public and or private services at societal scale. It also adds a little line in that there is no fixed definition, but this is our suggestion as the Digital Economy Working Group. And then the G20 communique in the digital section mentions digital public infrastructure as well, recognizing that DPIs are essential in creating a kind of safe, secure, trusted, and accountable system that works for people, that is respectful of human rights, that also respects principles of privacy and intellectual property rights. And there were quite a few initiatives that were launched alongside the summit. There was the G20 framework for systems of digital public infrastructure. There was also a global DPI repository where G20 members can voluntarily contribute their own projects and expertise. So that was also a major outcome of the summit. One more point is, I think it's really monumental that the African Union has also joined the G20 under India's presidency. I will not say that India can take full credit, because really the inclusion of the African Union has been deliberated for a couple of years now. But especially given that in the next decade or so, the next billion that comes online will mostly be from developing Asia and Africa. The inclusion of the African Union is very essential in especially the digital aspect of the G20. Yes. So yes, those were some of the major takeaways. Harshal, I'd love to hear from you as well. What did you think of the major successes of the presidency?
Yeah, so I think, Trisha, you laid out some great points on India's stack and the technology prowess. If I have to take a stab at um, where India is likely to be and the kind of challenges it could face, etc., from a business and investment standpoint, right, which is the sector I belong to. There's been a lot of drumbeat about, right, India at 100 years, the Amrit Kal, and this is likely to be a watershed for India to emerge as an economic and a technological powerhouse to the world. And this is in some sense a clarion call for the intelligentsia, for the politicians, the policymakers, the corporates, and broadly the citizens at large, in the way I see it, right? And if I have to address uh, this perspective on two fronts, one is technology, which you covered, Trisha, pretty well, and the second one is talent. Um, and I see them as the two primary pivots for India's real transformation in some sense. Um, so this decade has been touted as the decade, right? A decade where India will grow exponentially in its technological prowess. And for India to make it all real, um, I think a few things have to really come into place very quickly. One, I believe, is India's ability to foster some real innovation. India's ranking in the Global Innovation Index has improved a little bit, but it still has a long way to go in terms of bringing out more number of patents, more number of IPs, and how the country looks at taking a pole position, for example, say on AI moving forward. Yeah. Number two, how the government is able to further catalyze and accelerate its framework to promote startups, right? I think what has happened in the startup scenario in India in the last few years, and I've been watching this very closely, is this the dramatic acceleration in the quantum of startups and the diversity of startups in the last 7 to 8 years, right? With about 20 billion of worth of capital that has flown into India, with about 100,000 people now working in the startup ecosystem, with 100 plus active incubators. This whole Indian startup ecosystem has started coming of age and today ranks among of the top three in the world. I mean, US, China, and India. And the width and the depth of startups is incredible. That's what I meant by the diversity, all the way from deep tech startups to enterprise SaaS to retail to B2B. I think this, in my view, is tech entrepreneurship at its best. And more the government does to, for that matter, stays away and lets the private sector flourish in the startup world, will be an important point for India to consider as it looks at the next 25 years. And I think, and you covered this point, Trisha, and how India is able to harness technology for its own goods, or own good rather. The digital stack is doing wonders. But can this really be replicated in depth beyond UPI and Aadhaar? Can this be replicated in the health sector, in education sector? Right? The whole $1 trillion digital economy that India is talking about, right? Today it's about 200 billion. It wants to get the whole digital economy to about $1 trillion in about 2 years, and they have a plan. India has a plan with about 9 priority areas, 30 digital themes. So there's a bunch of things are in play. But what is really visible outside is UPI and Aadhaar today. I'm sure there's a lot of work happening. I met with Sharat Sharma. You talk about the volunteering organization that built a large part of this. The iSpirit organization that has built this. They are doubling down on many other sectors around the India stack. So. And also importantly is how do we spur more domestic consumption in India, right? For technology. You said, yeah, the internet penetration, while has improved dramatically, is still not where the Western world is. And the more penetration that happens, more consumption of technology happens internally within India, the better it is. But most important point that I want to touch upon is on talent, which is at the heart of it all. India's ability to produce the talent will be its real differentiator. If it has to really move from being a technology hub to being an innovation hub, for it to become a developed nation, an economic superpower, it needs to be able to provide very broad-based cross-industry jobs. And while a lot of good things have been said about the demographic dividend of India, and this demographic dividend is only likely to bulge into the future, it's the double-edged sword, right? The skilling report of 2022 said that 50% of people in India are unemployable. And India has a massive task ahead to make sure that it enhances its education, its curriculum, its focus on, maybe driving employability in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, focusing on reskilling. And maybe Badri can potentially also talk a little more about this, and from a G20 standpoint and or broadly from Niti Aayog standpoint. Millions of new people are coming to the workforce, and that calls for a need to transform the talent that exists. 90 million new non-farm jobs are likely to come into the fore. And on top of that, if we think of the numbers of 55 odd million women likely to enter the labor force, right? And this will at least partially correct the historical underrepresentation of women, and rightfully so. India's job creation imperative will be way, way higher. How will India transform itself? Not just the number of people coming into the job market, not just the number of young people India has, but how does it marry the two together to make sure that the right people are available for the right jobs? And also that India needs to grow at 8.5% in its GDP for it to be able to absorb so many people into the job force. Right now, India is not growing as much. So it's in some sense a double-edged sword, and I would love to discuss this more with both of you, Badri and Trisha. But with that said, maybe we can. I would like to open this up to both of you, and the question to you is, what do you see as India's challenges, right, to meet its vision in 2047? I mean, would love to get both your perspectives. Let's maybe start with Trisha.
Certainly, and I'd actually like to continue the discussion on skilling and employment that you started, Harshul. So India is actually it is the largest producer of STEM talent in the world, and 34% of graduates in India are in the STEM field. But like you mentioned, employability is a challenge. I also want to talk about women's education and employment specifically. While the enrollment of women in STEM degrees has gone up quite a bit, it's at about 43.2%, which is almost at parity and one of the highest in the world. But of all the women that graduate with STEM degrees, only 29% join the workforce. So you have this highly skilled, these highly skilled folks who just never enter the workforce. Part of the issue, of course, is cultural, in that there are familial pressures to not join the workforce or to care for the family. Workplaces also need to be more hospitable to women and their needs. All of that is certainly an issue. The other challenge is that youth unemployment is at 23% in the country. That can also become a public security issue, right? Because youth unemployment can be linked to several other challenges. China is going through the same thing, where you have a similar, like 21% of the youth is unemployed, and the Chinese Communist Party is terrified that this is going to lead to social issues as well. So yeah, that's certainly going to be a challenge for India's Vision 2047. That said, I'd be curious to see what the strategy is. So the government is currently in the process of building that strategy. I think there was news today that BCG has been employed to spearhead that effort, but each ministry is going out, looking for comments, looking for expert inputs, and hopefully what comes out of this process is something that will have depth and meaningful impact. Yeah.
No, I think I agree with you. I think the statistics that you showed, Trisha, are staggering. 23% of unemployed youth. I think India has its task cut out. Badri, you have a point of view from a Niti Aayog standpoint. I'm sure you also know how India is tackling this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Harshul, and thanks, Trisha, for the perspective. And definitely the vision that you mentioned, that's something that Niti Aayog has been working on, and I've been part of that. And I used to lead that initiative before, and now I'm still contributing as a fellow. So we looked at multiple aspects. There were sectoral group of secretaries who were formed, and there were different for different sectors. There were different senior officials who were involved, and we got some very detailed vision items, and also roadmaps actually. So it's not sufficient to just say that we need to have a dream, but how do we achieve the dream? What should we do right now in the near term, in the medium term, and in the long term to reach that? So from that perspective, I've also been doing some analytical, aspects of this vision. There are some big aspects, the big picture aspects, like, India becoming a developed country by 2047, based on whatever definition that is for developed country today, in real terms in 2047. We also, in some ways, we want to reduce inequality and, eliminate poverty. A lot of ambitious things there. And also one more thing is, we want to grow very rapidly. In order to be a developed country in 2047 means we have to grow very rapidly, and at the same time we have to grow with this net zero transition strategy. So we have to grow rapidly and grow green. So that, and I already told you about reduction in inequality, elimination of poverty, and so on. So with all these constraints, for any economist or mathematical economist, this is like what we call as constraint optimization, right? So it's too many constraints, and we still have to reach the target. So that's the biggest challenge in a way. We don't have the luxury of growing unscrupulously. So we have to grow, keeping in mind the resources, constraints, and so on. And financially also, there is a lot of challenges. If India has to grow so rapidly, it has to be not only consumption driven, but also investment driven. Because consumption is there. India is a large economy, large country. So if the 1.7 billion, like you mentioned, Harshul, in 2047, if so many people consume so many things, we are going to have a lot of demand. But that is not sufficient. We need to have investment. We need to have a lot of new production. We need to have a much larger manufacturing sector, much more efficient agricultural sector, and larger services sector. So we need a lot of progress to be made in all these aspects. So that is a big challenge. How do we get investments to boost efficiency, to increase scale, and so on? So that is another major challenge. And that is a kind of a perennial problem in India, given even now there are a lot of difficulties, a lot of barriers to investment. So the investment climate has to be improved. So I would say that in the last couple of decades, right after 91 and in the recent years, we have had a lot of progress made in this area, but we still have to have a lot to do to attract investments. And we also have to be more open in terms of trade, and that is another work in progress. So these are all some aspects, and skill development is a very, very important aspect. I also see a question already about that, and some discussions that Trisha also initiated. So in terms of skill development, it's very much part of the Vision 2047 plan. There are aspects starting from school level, like for example, the gross enrollment ratio for the secondary school age population. The percentage is basically around 75% today, and we should actually make it 100 by 2047, that it has to be 100% school enrollment. And another important indicator is the PISA program for international student assessment ranking. So India doesn't do that now, but we aim to be really in the top 5 or so in 2047. So we have to take steps towards that direction. I think this is one example, but there are many aspects in which we have to do a lot of standardization. We have to align, align with the global standards, because there is no point in developing national standards that are not coherently aligned with the global standards. So skill is one example where we can say that our standards have increased, but then what is the where do we stand in the rest of the world? And in the tertiary education, for the college education and so on, so the current gross enrollment ratio is only 28%, and we should aim for something more than 60-65%. Again, the university rankings, if you look at the QS World University Rankings, right now, there are only 3 Indian universities in top 200 and none in the top 100. So that's a really bad data for such a large country like India, global player like India. So we have to have at least like 10 universities in top 100 by 2047. Skilled labor force, as a percentage of labor force right now, is less than a quarter. Like 21% of the total labor force is skilled. We need to boost it much higher, like close to 100%. So these are some aspects. But then how do we go there? There are a lot of different schemes in terms of apprenticeship. How there can be public-private partnership in terms of facilitating these apprenticeships, where the students can learn learn practical aspects, vocational aspects while studying. Vocational training innovation centers and so on. One model that I always think about and that has been working successfully in one Indian state, that is Telangana, is called Telangana Academy of Skills and Knowledge, TASK. So that's a quite interesting model which can be emulated across the country and even across the world. So what they do is they look at exact match between the supply and demand. So they look at the large companies, like you can say Microsoft or Amazon, which are all which have offices in Hyderabad, and that is where this is located, and it's a government body. So they approach for specific skills, people with specific skills, and then they have a bunch of academic institutions across the country who can provide those skill training, specific skills-based training, not academic, but more vocational, practical. And then that is funded by the CSR, corporate social responsibility of the companies that are seeking those skills. And then you get a bunch of students across the state trained on that. And then some of them get absorbed in the company, which is sponsoring it, and others get skilled anyway. So this is one kind of agile model where the government doesn't actually need to put in a lot of money, but it can be based on public-private partnership. So there are many other things like this that can be talked about, but I'll take a pause now and.
Yeah, no, I think thanks, Badru. I think you covered a very wide range of not just the challenges but also potential solutions to what India needs to do. We have a strong leadership in India at the helm today, from policymakers to politicians, and with a very strong-willed government to make it happen. I wanted to also explore a little more about US and India technology cooperation. Whether it is in the areas of AI or cybersecurity or semicons or clean energy. I think it's going to be important that US and Indian companies, the academic institutions, and startups also kind of come together to drive joint innovation between the two countries. So, and Trisha, given your background, where do you see this headed? Are we headed in the right direction? Is any meaningful work happening in this direction today?
So looking at the US-India tech relationship, I think the broad consensus at the moment is that all these years of dialogue and slowly building up are starting to pay off. You're starting to see actual progress in that relationship. And the US-India ICET, the Critical and Emerging Technologies Partnership, is a shining example of that. And I'll talk about one space in which that partnership has made quite a bit of progress, especially in this year, and that is semiconductors. We've already seen the announcement of plants by US companies in India. There was a big Micron announcement a few weeks ago. Then Lam Research also announced that they would be implementing this virtual physical ecosystem for training semiconductor engineers. So you're moving away from just like setting up plants to actually training the next generation workforce that will work on some of these technologies. And Lam Research has a very interesting model that they call Semiverse, where they're integrating some of these new metaverse technologies and combining your physical and virtual systems into very interesting interactive ways of training semiconductor engineers. There's also been a joint research and development agreement which was signed with between the Indian Semiconductor Mission and Purdue University, which is aimed at making progress and developing programs on designing, manufacturing, and commercializing semiconductor chips. So you're already seeing some of this happening specifically in the semiconductor space. I would say that so some of the semiconductor plants that have been announced in India, they're like 28 millimeter, whereas the cutting edge is like 4. So this is still like low hanging fruit, but India has to start somewhere to get to that level, and just having that ecosystem slowly building in the country is a major step. And I also see the fact that the US-India relationship has built so much trust to be able to do all of this as a major sign, especially when you just look back even just 2 decades ago at where the relationship was.
No, absolutely. I agree. The advancement that has happened between the two countries is like never before. When Prime Minister Modi was here 2 months ago and I was in DC, the amount of traction that we could see in the reception, the rousing welcome that he got, no other Prime Minister has ever gotten before. So it's just signs of a strong partnership and friendship building up between the two countries. And the question is how well we will continue to sustain this and for the betterment of both. But with that, I would also actually encourage the audience to put their questions in the chat box. We'll start Q&A in about 5 minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, or I don't know if mine would be okay to open it up for people to ask questions, but I think the preference would be to put your questions in the chat box and one of us can answer. So I'll continue on this, and if we have to think about how India should encompass understanding the contours of its labor force, right, and the related issues, and we did talk about skilling a little bit. The overall number of jobs and the skill alignment issues that are happening, and Badri, you had just started talking about it a little. From Tech Mahindra standpoint, right, the company that I represent, we are one of the largest systems integrators in the country, technology systems integrators, and we hire on an average 800 people, 700 to 800 people a week. Okay, it's a massive hiring engine, and we are increasingly realizing that large cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad are not cutting it for us. And we started going to tier 2, tier 3 cities where attrition is low, people are more committed, and now we have started seeing that more and more universities are coming to those smaller towns and they're churning out engineers. But we continue to struggle to find the right talent across the country. But we are focusing on tier 2 and tier 3. So I don't know if, Badri, you have a view on how tier 2, tier 3 cities are being addressed in India, because that is where I believe the real potential for next level of growth of India lies. It's not probably in the metros, right? Would you agree with me, Badri?
Yeah, absolutely, Harshul. I myself hail from a tier 2 city. in Coimbatore, and I cannot agree more with you. And there's a lot of activities happening in the tier 2 cities. As you probably know, a lot of new IITs and IIMs have come up in the smaller cities, like tier 2 cities and so on. And that is one important step towards this broader goal of also some kind of distribution in terms of growth, right? Distribution is not only in terms of different income classes and different types of people, but also different regions and different cities and so on. So it's already happening. And also a lot of initiatives in terms of, for example, there has been announcement of the defense corridors in different parts of the country, which in the cities that are not like the metro cities and so on. So a lot of opportunities are created. And what I have seen in the past is in India, if you take auto industry, for example, like Mahindra part of your business, for example. So we have had a lot of progress made over time when we open up for to the global players coming to the country, and you have an ecosystem that is developed. Like if you look at before the 90s, India had only a couple of auto companies, and nothing much was going on in terms of the entire supply chain. Mostly it was like importing a lot of stuff and then assembling. But then once we liberalized the investment regime, once we had a lot of these companies coming into different cities, particularly in some of the tier 2 cities, the strong supply chain ecosystem was developed. So that is one aspect. So these two things, one is industrial development, supply chain development, and the educational institutions. These are going to be important going forward. And also, like some of the points that I already mentioned in terms of developing, why should we rely only on IITs and IIMs? What about the other universities? We have to also raise the bar of other universities. We have to come up with strategies to really work on skills in multiple sectors. And there is also one issue in India, particularly in South India, and also some part of the rest of India, which is like if you're like most of the elite get into engineering or medicine. So there is very little focus on sciences and liberal arts and so on. So that has to develop a lot. So we don't have a lot of strategic leaders, scientists and so on who need to come up. So that is another thing that has to be worked on. But I just want to digress a little bit and touch upon one topic that Trisha and you mentioned before about India-US cooperation. This is one of the areas where that can be done. So when Prime Minister Modi came, I was part of the discussion there, and we came up with a few points which were accepted in the final White House statement. One of them was about in terms of AI and in terms of digital technologies. US can be the R&D center, and India can be the R&D commercialization or implementation center. So that is one kind of collaboration. And that is also, you also have a skill component there. And similarly, we also discussed about the healthcare, like in terms of nurses and other healthcare workers. US can help India develop skills for that kind of a workforce, and then recruit them here. We can have visas for them and so on. And another aspect is this Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, and semiconductors related interventions in the US can be complemented with India's own, production linked incentives, PLA scheme for semiconductors and electronic devices. And there's already a lot of, discussion happening on that. And Trisha already mentioned about Micron and so on. So there is a lot of areas in which India and US can also collaborate in this particular issue that we discussed, skill development as well, and the tier 2, tier 3 cities development.
Yeah, and I do see a question here in the Q&A box from Ken Silverman, who I know so well. But I think we already answered this question. I think the question was more to you, Badri, right? I think on sharing some specific details on how India intends to address employment and skilling. And lack of success on these fronts and high unemployment can have significant negative impact on the 2047 aspirations and goals. But I think, yeah, Badri, I think you did answer this question quite well. So till we see other questions, maybe we can go on. I think one of the key challenges I see for a nation building, right? One is to become a developed nation, but for nation building and for it to materialize its vision, while geopolitics and its economic firepower are important, I think it's very important for India to look inwards and bring about that massive improvement that is needed towards the poorest of the poor. Improvement in poverty, in its healthcare infrastructure and education, and obviously we spoke about employment. But maybe Trisha, since you worked closely on India Stack and you understand this well, maybe you could help us understand how you see, and maybe Badri, you can also add on to this, by the way, but see India Stack and its push towards digitization of citizen services. I know while UPI has been transformative, even the poor people are able to have bank accounts and are able to transact without cash today. But when it comes to other sectors, right, healthcare and education, do you see that India elevating its position soon enough for it to be called a developed nation?
Yes, so some of these India Stack projects, Aadhaar, them have helped in many ways. One is just plugging leakages in the system where you would have like rations or services or goods kind of getting lost in a network of middlemen or not going to the intended recipient of these goods and services. And so Aadhaar has certainly helped in that aspect. And over time, like initially when Aadhaar was rolled out, there were issues of like, there were errors or Aadhaars were issued. Like there was a news article about an Aadhaar card being issued to a goose anyway. But all of those issues have gradually been fixed. There do remain some challenges, especially in terms of cybersecurity of a database as sensitive as Aadhaar. But again, the government has assured citizens that it has been working on shoring up the cyber defenses of those. The other element, especially in terms of finances that helped, like cashless payments, yes, is part of it. Like I can go to most parts of tier 1, tier 2, maybe even tier 3 cities and pay somebody with the app on my phone. And most people prefer cashless transactions now. But the other part has also been the Jan Dhan bank accounts, where you can open an account with a 1 rupee balance. So it's not prohibitive to just go to the bank and open your account. So you have all of these smaller initiatives that have helped. The other part of it that is really catered towards rural areas is something called community information resource centers, which are offline centers where people can go, which have connectivity. They can enroll for services. There's somebody there who explains what services they can avail, and they can. And these are especially targeted to the most backward districts, and so they're able to access all of these services through offline methods as well, which is so important. Like you can't just digitize and then leave behind everybody who is not able to keep up with that pace. So all of this has been part of it as well.
No, I see where you're going with this, and I see a question in the question box also, which in some sense a great question, by the way, from Christy, where I'll read it out for everyone. It says, everyone keeps saying this is India's time. What specifically do you predict we'll see from India in the next decade? How will advancements in tech and economy impact social equity in India? Do you think it will create more social division or close social gaps? I think it's a complex issue. Maybe if you both are okay, I'll take a stab at it for a minute, and then any of you who wants to add. I think, as I said in the beginning, I think India is touting this to be the decade, the age of technology, and how it's going to build progress. Now, technology to help it create a soft digital diplomacy and soft power in the world is one part. Technology to help its citizens come out of poverty and improve healthcare is where I believe the real impact lies of technology. Uh, I agree there is a lot of social inequity in India today. And from my vantage point, I know from Tech Mahindra standpoint, at least how much work we are doing for rural India and bringing technology for betterment of health, whether it is a hardware or a software device, right? Even mobile ECGs are coming out, which can go into villages and do it. AR, VR goggles are coming out where we can, a doctor can look at a patient and project the image to say a Delhi, and a specialized doctor can look at the patient using technology, and on the spot treatment can be given. Lots of these areas where technology started playing an important role. I met with a gentleman who's leading AI for good cause in India. They're coming with 25 use cases for AI, primarily around rural health, yeah, and how it is going to impact India. So while it looks pretty fancy at this point, I'm sure the real impact on the ground will be felt. I'm an eternal optimist. I'm sure in next 2 to 3 years we'll start feeling those impacts. And same on education, with online education coming in. Online education is now moving to tier 3 cities and villages, and a lot of people are getting educated without having access to physical schools and teachers on site. So, yeah, I think not just next decade, I would say next 2 to 3 years, most of this impact will start getting felt. But yeah, Trisha, Badri, if you guys are closer to the ground on this, maybe you can chip in.
Yeah, maybe thanks, Harshul and Trisha. So basically, India's approach towards technology, like Trisha also mentioned before, is we call this as Jam Trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, Mobile. Basically, Jan Dhan is about getting banking for everyone, and Aadhaar is a unique ID for everyone, and then mobile banking and so on. So we have this DPI that we discussed about. So I think in terms of digital payments, just last financial year, we had 114 billion digital payments that are recorded, the first highest number in the world. All these things happen because technology has been, in a way, channelized to be inclusive. I was talking to some people on the ground, like the auto rickshaw wallahs and so on. And they were saying that after the UPI has come, they really don't have to worry about, many of them live in metro cities, but their families are in rural areas. So like when I was about to pay that auto guy, in cash, he said, "Don't pay me in cash, please pay me in UPI, the digital stuff, because that will directly go to my home, and that's Diwali time, and they'll make use of that for festival." So that's the level of reach the technology has gone. And another one reason for that is, apart from the fact that the technology has been made easy, there's also a vernacular medium. So every like all the mobile phones, all the technologies are also friendly in the local languages. People can read them in the local languages. That also created a lot of opening up. So in some ways, there has been, I wouldn't say it is purely a government initiative. It is a private sector. It's actually a market-driven thing, because industry is also looking for such a huge market in India. So they come up with these solutions, which are not elitist. They are very, very mass oriented. So that is where I think there is some developments happening in terms of social equity. However, there's still, this issue is still a serious issue. Social division, social gaps are still there. And when we looked at when the colleges and schools were closed during the COVID, I did some studies on that. And I realized that a lot of people are suffering because they didn't have access to the internet and they couldn't participate in the examinations and so on. So that is still there. The digital divide is still there. So it's going to be a very tricky territory.
Convoluted, complex issue. India is a complex country. How many languages it has, how many microcultures it has. Whether it will be successful in bridging the social equity gaps in India, time will tell. But at least the intent seems to be there. The intent seems to be there that technology will be a good leveler. It'll go down to the grassroots level to improve lives and healthcare, so on and so forth. I see a couple of other interesting questions. One is from Benjamin L. Says, we saw on headlines that China's Xi Jinping did not attend G20 summit. While there is strong support for the US-India partnership, how are relations between China and India shaping up? What strategy do you think India will adopt in terms of geopolitical alliances to achieve the India 2047 mission?
I can take a stab at this question. This question needs probably another hour. But very briefly, I think as many times Indian External Affairs Minister has told, India and China are have been neighbors. They have long civilizational relationships for several thousands of years. So these ups and downs keep happening, and they do like to bridge the gap and so on. But it's a very difficult situation now. It's extremely tricky on both sides. So I don't see this getting better in the near future. But at least given the other this long-standing relationship and cultural exchanges and so on, it may not escalate into a major conflict or something, but this will stay as a kind of a Cold War. In terms of geopolitical alliances, India has been part of, as you know, IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and Quad and various other initiatives. I personally feel like India can do a lot more in this than just being part of these alliances. But India should take leadership in many of them and promote trade. India also should be more open in terms of trade. So basically, I think we have to do a lot more. It's right at the moment. It's more like we are taking part in all this. We are actively engaging in all these discussions and so on. But I see that we need to do much more to convert all these into economic alliances and have supply chain cooperation and have trade cooperation and so on. So we need to be a very much more positive global player. We are moving towards that direction, but we need to move very fast. Because I was recently in OECD Paris, where I was addressing the Forum on Global Trade. I was really excited to see the level of interest that all the OECD countries had on India. And they were all kind of exactly like Benjamin was asking here. Everyone is looking at what is India's strategy? How is India going to go forward? How is India going to take this as an advantage to go forward? So lot needs to be done here. That's the short answer to this question.
Yeah, and it's not, again, these are great questions and difficult questions. They're putting us on a spot here. But I think whether it is the China question or the social equity question, these are not easy answers to this. China is a complex relationship with India. India continues to grow in its economic prowess and technological prowess and be the counterbalance, the counterforce in the region for the world to engage in. And India being a democracy, the largest democracy in the world, clearly has its merits and advantages to deal with and be seen as a real leader on the world stage, in my view, as compared to China and India. There's one more last question, but I don't think we have time for that. But your largely answers what you just said, Badri. The question is around, from an anonymous attendee, question is around, will India be a competitive destination for future investments, diversifying from China as part of China Plus One strategy, and what challenges will India face in attracting this investment? So I think we did answer this question to an extent, that the more India continues to engage the world and grow and use its demographic and dividend more effectively, and the unique vantage point that it has today, and as it looks at the future, while nobody has a crystal ball, but and particularly with this fractured world, as I was saying earlier, with Israel and Gaza and the kind of things that are happening around us, India has an opportunity to leapfrog and be a beacon of light and hope in the world together. And on that optimistic note, I would like to close and hand it back to Man for closure. Thanks, Trisha, and thanks, Badri.
Well, Thank you, Badri, Trisha, and Harshu, for such a great discussion. And then once again, thank you all the members and friends for with us today online. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you of all the exciting upcoming programs in Seattle, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and online. So our next upcoming events hosted by the Asia Society Seattle Center will be on November 20th, where we'll explore U.S.-China collaboration in biotech. So we talk about technology, U.S. and India collaboration, and then U.S.-China competition. So we'll talk about biotech next month. And in San Francisco, APAC will present its 2023 grand finale in November. Asia Society Northern California will be partnering with National Center on APAC to host 2 invitation-only programs with outstanding leaders in policy, business, tech, education, arts, and culture on November 15th and 16th at the CEO Summit. And on November 30th, at our APAC After event, we'll celebrate the successful conclusion of our APAC programs and thank our members for their support. So the event will feature an exclusive screening of our APAC program at the CEO Summit, accompanied by food, drinks, and then various fun activities. And the 6th annual Future of U.S.-China Conference, our signature program, will be taking place on Thursday, January 18th, 2024 at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. And this is a full-day multi-panel live programming event with leading voices in the U.S.-China field. And then we hope you can join us for these programs. Please remember to check our websites for a complete list of programs and the details. If you're not already a member, please join us so that you can enjoy program benefits that are only available to members. And if you wanted to sponsor a program, please reach out to us. Last but not least, I'd like to thank my colleagues in San Francisco and Seattle for making this program possible. Margaret Conley, our executive director, who was unable to join us today, unfortunately, and also Nina, Christy, Jason, Aaron, and our interns, Ali, Madhav, Benjamin, Evan, and Qingyi. And again, on behalf of Asia Society Seattle and Asia Society Northern California, thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.